Welcome to this special crossover edition of Powerhouse Podcast, where Diego Sanchez, HousingWire's president, sits down with James Dwiggins, who is the CEO and co-founder of NextHome. James is known in the real estate industry for having a lot of strong opinions, and he is not afraid to share them on this podcast. So he's going to talk a lot about clear cooperation policies, legal issues with dual agency, and MLS practices. So enjoy this crossover, and we'll see you on RealTrending next week.
I'm thrilled to welcome James Dwiggins. James is the CEO of NextHome, a national real estate brokerage with 600 plus offices and 6,000 plus agents. James, how do you differentiate NextHome from other national brokerages?
Yeah, well, just slight correction, we're a franchise. Just want to make sure people got that. Look, it's ever since we started the company back in 2014, so about 10 years old now, we were always looking to try and be a little bit different than the rest of the industry in the sense of it wasn't about having tons of agents. It was about quality of the people who shared sort of the same vision for the industry. So, we've been very focused as a company since our inception on just doing things a little bit different, really focusing on the community, really focusing on people, putting people first over money. We have this saying in our company called humans over houses. We actually have a whole website on it where we do stories of customers and just like how they got into real estate. And so we start with that. And a lot of people talk about culture, and you can't define a culture. You have to sort of experience it. But, we've always been really selective on who owns a franchise and who's part of our organization. So if we had a different approach to the business, we would have had 20 or 30 or 40,000 agents by now, but that wasn't what we were trying to accomplish. We're a privately held firm. We don't have any investors. So we've been able to make a lot of decisions that are about our long-term goals of being a very professional company, servicing people in a full-time role, and really focusing on, what buyers and sellers want in a real estate experience. That's our sort of guiding principle. And I think that shifts sort of how we've grown and what we operate as a business. So
yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that growth trajectory too, because typically with franchise organizations, it's all about the sales process and bringing on more franchises. Mm-hmm. But it sounds like you approach that sales process a little bit differently.
Yeah, we do. So I'd say probably 40% of our growth is just referral. So it's somebody that comes in and, they love the culture, they love the company, they love how we operate. And then they know other people that would be a great fit for the organization. We are, the best example I could give you is when we hold events, I've heard of dinners where 96 franchise owners went to dinner together. Like it's just this very unique culture. And then I'll add this other comment. We're geared a little differently in that we don't target large real estate offices. So as a franchise, we were one of the first that, in fact, we're probably still one of the only that does virtual offices. So we don't require people to have a brick and mortar location. And we definitely are geared towards teams that have wanted to operate their own business. So we'll pull the team from another company and they want to operate a franchise. They want all the tools and support, but they're not required to grow. A lot of franchises are like recruit. We're like, we don't really care about that. If you want to recruit, great. If you want to just do your own business and grow your production, you can do that too. So there's not any type of requirements on the franchisee, which allows us to tap a different market than a lot of our competitors. So
do you have a separate business development team that is out there moving franchises, or is that really with the leadership team?
Yeah, it's mostly with the leadership team. So we have one person that handles our growth, and then she has, some people underneath her, but it's really just been our VP of growth has been since the beginning. We get around, right now, probably around 60 inquiries a month to franchise. We take on average less than 10. We have pretty strict requirements for financials. We don't even look at that. Actually, it's what we first is just kind of talk to the person and see, who they are, what they're looking for. We have a no assholes policy as a company. So if somebody's very egotistical, we're not a good fit, because for us, it's all about making sure that you're putting the right leaders in the position based upon the company's overall goals. And part of that is not about the agent, but it's about the consumer. And so we weed out a lot of people very quickly with that. And that's not to be derogatory towards the industry. It's just how we approach things. So
Yeah, I hear that. We have a similar policy at HousingWire. There's really no need for there's plenty of great people out there. There's no need to bring on assholes into the company.
Yeah.
So you and I have gotten to know each other because you've been a fairly prominent industry voice on the commission lawsuits and the recent NAR settlement. Could you give our audience kind of a state of play for real estate commissions and the impact of that NAR settlement?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been talking about it for, I don't even know, almost 2 years now. And unfortunately, a lot of what I said ended up happening, which is what I wanted to have happen, but it is what it is. We're in the first inning. I think that's the most important thing for people to understand. Obviously, since August 17th, we've only had a few months to see how things have played out. There's been multiple studies coming out now that show that compensation is starting to decrease, especially on the buyer's agent side of it, which is what we expected. There's a lot of things that have not been figured out still. And this isn't, again, the industry is trying to figure this out. It just is going to take time. So I want to preface it with that. But, the MLSs are left to enforce the rules. They don't have the infrastructure to do that, nor I don't even know how they would. So we have no idea if agents are signing buyer rep agreements before they show a property. Like, nobody's asking for copies of those buyer rep agreements, which is a requirement if you're under an NAR governed MLS. Another issue that's happening right now is buyers don't know what they're signing. And if you think about the practice of how we do things, we load up a document into DocuSign. We hope the agent explains it. We send it to, the customer. They click start, sign. They never read the damn thing. And so, you've got probably buyers all over the place signing multiple buyer rep agreements because they're looking to see a property. The agent says, sign here. They roll into the property. You've got 4 or 5 agents now that you've signed a buyer rep agreement with. Then you buy a house. Who gets paid? That's going to be a fun one. So there's a lot of enforcement mechanisms that are an issue. And then, some of the biggest issues that we're seeing right now is some of the brokerages have decoupled compensation, which I'll talk a little bit more details on. A lot of them have not. And so you have this world where the lack of training and guidance by brokerages is in some cases really horrible, where they're not teaching their people. They don't know what the process is. And so if a seller's not offering compensation, the buyer's agent just tells the buyer this, and then the buyer goes, well, let's go look at something else, when the buyer's agent should say, they're not offering compensation, but that doesn't mean anything. We can put that as a request in the offer. There's just a really lack of training, and it comes all the way from the top down. I think NAR has done an okay job on trying to get the information out there. I think that they've unfortunately listened to their lawyers too much and were very, very cautious when they should have had guidance that was very clear. They've recently done that, to give them credit. They have 2 new guidance documents that just came out a week and a half ago that were extraordinarily clear on what is steering, what is not steering, like what you can do and not do. But we know that's about 2.5 months later than what it should have been. So there's a lot of problems that we're still facing as an industry. And then the biggest one is forms. It's a mess, to put it bluntly. You have some state associations that are keeping cooperative compensation in the forms. Those forms are created by a committee of competing brokerages, which is literally how we got into the lawsuit to begin with. And so the lawyers have come out on 2 separate interviews and have said, if you're using forms that are created by a group of competitors that are propping up compensation, we're going to sue you again. They literally have said that publicly. So it's a problem for a lot of us. In like my company, we don't do cooperative compensation, period. It's banned across all of our offices. EXP's done the same thing. Like, a lot of companies have made that direction, and that makes it hard in the market where you have a lot of really educated people on the subject trying to work with a lot of uneducated people on the subject. And so there's a lot of conflict that's happening. So that's a kind of an overview of where we are.
Yeah,
so
no, it's really helpful. And so do you think it's going to take another series of lawsuits to get this compliance up to speed?
I hope not. I fear that's where we're headed. I'll give you an example. So just for your viewers and listeners to know, I'm also my company is a named defendant, and we settled with the lawyers. So I have a little bit I have a lot more perspective than 99.9% of the people, because we had to work with the plaintiff's lawyers on settling the case. My legal fees were $100,000 a month at one point. Nobody in this industry that's listening to this can afford these legal fees, just for context. And so the issues are, we are trying to hold on to the past when we need to be, I say skating to where the puck is going to be. And I'll give you a great example of this. This is just, it's so blatantly clear. It's like, I can't figure out why the industry doesn't get it. So we paid our lawyers to do an assessment on the industry and our organization to tell us what the plaintiff's lawyers would do next. What are they going to sue us for next? I'll give you one of them. Cooperative compensation. If in this world, and this is just very logical when I lay it out this way, in this new world where a buyer's agent meets with a buyer before they show a property, they lay out their services, they lay out their fee, they agree on terms, et cetera, and they sign a buyer rep agreement. Maybe it's for that property, maybe it's for the day, maybe it's for 3 months, whatever it might be. That fee, proven by all of the studies coming out, will vary by agent. Understandably, can be, I'm not going to give numbers, but it can be all over the place, right? So knowing that, if you're a seller's agent and you are doing cooperative compensation where you are charging the seller your fee and an additional fee that you're going to share with the buyer's agent, you are harming the seller a majority of the time. The reason is you have no idea what the fee is that the buyer agent and buyer agreed to. And if that fee is lower than what you're advertising in advance of an offer, the difference becomes damages. So here's your next class action case. Lawyers are going to build up some time, get a couple years behind it to create the class. They're going to sue every brokerage that is doing cooperative compensation. And they're going to look and they're going to grab all the files and see what the amount of money was that the agent shared, what the amount of money was that the buyer's agent was supposed to be paid. And if there was a difference that the buyer's agent requested as a concession because you told the buyer's agent what your seller was willing to do, there's your damages. And that becomes an actual number they can quantify. And then because it's a class action, it's treble damages. So times 3. And I think it's bigger than Burnett Scissor.
Yeah, James, I don't think you can be any clearer than that. And I think you lay out a really good case there. Do you think that dual agency is another area that that the lawyers are going to look at?
Yeah, I do. The problem is like trying to define dual agency is the issue. So it's defined differently by state. So dual agency, for example, in the state of California is technically the same agent, 2 agents in the same brokerage. What I think you're referring to, at least what I refer to dual agency as, is that we call single agent dual agency, the same agent representing the buyer and the seller.
Yeah.
I think there's some huge issues with that. And I'll give you some stats that'll really kind of blow your mind. So the idea of dual agency, single agent dual agency, is bad in general. There's a reason why you can't use the same lawyer to represent the defendant and the plaintiff. They do a conflict check before you hire a lawyer, and you can't represent 2 parties and not have bias. It's impossible. So knowing that, you can't represent a buyer and a seller without bias. You know something that you're not supposed to know. That's how negotiation works. You're supposed to negotiate, in the best interest of your client. So I think that dual agency is a big issue. I think you're going to see it become a bigger topic of conversation at the state level. And what I think will happen is single agent dual agency will be looked at. To be clear, 9 states already ban it. It's not allowed in 9 states. So I think you'll see a lot of that happen over the other states as people feel harmed. And then this is the one to really dig in on. So I talked to a couple of insurance carriers, and I can't name them just on the record, but they basically said that they're looking at this right now going, it's failure to disclose and then misrepresentation are the 2 most common claims for E&O policies. And dual agency, on average, the claims are 17 to 20% higher. So if you're doing dual agency, your insurance rates will skyrocket, or eventually they just won't offer you an E&O policy. Yeah.
Yeah, it just seems really logical that someone representing both sides of a transaction can't fairly represent both sides of that transaction. It's impossible.
You can't. I don't. Everybody argues with me about this. I'm like, well, if the seller told you what they're willing to go down to, you now know a material fact that you shouldn't know if you're representing the buyer.
To me, there's very little argument on the other side.
It's like CCP. It's the same concept. Like,
right.
So,
cooperative compensation, dual agency, two practices that I imagine are not allowed at NextHome. Are there other practices that you've implemented at NextHome that are helping you prevent being a part of the next lawsuit that happens?
Yeah. So we don't. So we have a whole bunch of processes. Number one is we don't share commissions. It doesn't mean that a seller can't advertise that they're willing to pay a buyer's agent compensation. We just do seller direct payments, meaning the seller pays the buyer brokerage through the closing process. We don't collect any money. We don't both share representing the seller and we don't collect representing the buyer. So if we're representing the buyer, we tell the listing agent that we won't be sharing in compensation with you, that the seller needs to make a seller direct payment to the buyer brokerage. That causes issues because it requires them to go back and amend the listing agreement. So we don't do that. The other thing is, we've been very clear to our agents what steering is. And steering is basically, by the DOJ's definition, is anything that you are doing to influence a buyer to look at a certain property over another because of compensation. So we do not allow a buyer to tell our agents, I don't want to see any homes for sale that aren't offering compensation because I can't afford to pay you. That's not how it works. We go, don't worry about that. We're going to show you every house that's for sale that you want to see. And we'll make it part of the offer. And so we'll negotiate that into the terms. Whether we can make it come together or not, we don't know. But right now, your whole job is to find the house that you want. It's my job to help you get into that property. There is steering going on all over the place. And I'm not ragging on the agents. They just don't know because they haven't been trained yet. They're still working through some of this stuff. But we don't allow that. There's companies that have had agents the buyer signs a form saying they're not going to see properties that aren't offering compensation. Is a really stupid practice. So we have these policies in place to protect us. Also, on the sell side, we have a little CYA that we do where if the seller wants to offer compensation to the buyer brokerage in advance of an offer, we don't. We have a disclaimer that they sign stating it was their idea, not ours. Yep. That it's 100%, we advise them that our recommendation on all listings, and this is our company policy, is we call it, PITO, put it in the offer. So basically everything we tell a seller is we recommend that your practice is we will advertise seller is willing to entertain any and all requests, put it in your offer. When an agent calls us and says, are you offering compensation? We say the seller is willing to entertain any and all requests, whatever you need to put a deal together, just put it in the offer. It's really not that complicated, right? They make it complicated, but it's not. So that's some of the policies that we've done to protect the company in the future. So,
James, I think a lot of this stuff is just simpler and more logical. And so I know that there were a lot of challenges with the NAR settlement and all the commission lawsuits, but a lot of these practices feel like they're better for every party in the home transaction.
They are. Look, I mean, I'll argue the other side of it just to make a podcast interesting. I do agree that I believe these are the right practices. That being said, it is going to be a challenge for first-time home buyers.
Right.
That's a fact. And we don't have a mechanism to help with that. I would also play on the other side of that. First-time home buyers have always had a problem. In 2021, they couldn't buy a house either. It's not saying that that's an answer. I do think that this is an issue that we're going to be facing is in a tight inventory market. First-time home buyers, which we all know real estate is the largest generator of wealth in this country, will struggle to get in to buy a property. And that's something I think that we have to pay close attention to, because right now the racial gap's increasing. It's a huge problem for minorities to own real estate. That's how they generate most of their wealth. That number's getting lower and lower on home ownership. So there are fundamental things that I'm concerned about with it. But from a liability standpoint, I can simplify this, and the industry is just struggling to get there. It really needs to be this. The listing agreement is the fee that the listing agent charges and the services they offer, the end. There's not concessions. There's not offers of compensation. There's not any of that crap. Just get rid of it. It's just, this is my fee for what I do. And then the buyer's agent charges the buyer their fee. And they have a conversation about, can you afford to pay this? No. Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. Then the plan is going to be to put that in the offer, understanding that there might be situations where the seller isn't willing to pay it, and we'll have to deal with that at that point in time. But that's just cleaner. It just removes all of this, alleged conspiracy. I mean, look, there's a lot of things our industry does. There wasn't some massive conspiracy. I've been in this business a long time. That just doesn't happen. Those conversations that were alleged in court just do not occur. All that being said, I am moving towards where I think this needs to be, and I hope the industry moves quicker as well. So,
all right, let's dig in on the National Association of Realtors.
Yay.
So you've recently been traveling a lot, including going to the NAR Next Event in Boston.
Did.
What were your takeaways from that event?
So it was interesting because I've been to a lot of NAR conferences. First off, I think that it's very apparent where market conditions are. And what I mean by that is attendance was really low. And that's not, I don't think, just ragging on NAR. I just think people aren't making a lot of money. They're not spending it right now. I mean, that's just common across residential real estate. Certainly, there's probably a lot of pushback from the big brokers not supporting NAR at this point with all of the issues. But I will also say that the energy was somewhat optimistic, like cautiously optimistic, in that I think people kind of have the bearings and understand sort of where we are. And so it didn't feel super negative like it may have felt a while ago, where there's this looming, mess, and then obviously the lawsuit and the outcome, et cetera. So I feel like there's some cautious optimism. I will say a couple other things. I think Nakia is actually the right person for the job at this point. I'll explain why. I was skeptical to begin with because my concern as an outsider could be a problem not understanding the bureaucracy and the inner workings of the industry. The more I think about it, and having spent quite a bit of time with her, I actually think that's what we need right now, is someone to look at this through a lens of why are we doing things the way they are being done, and to question everything and to really dig in on that. So, she's been full-time for a few months. And so I think we have to give her some grace to work through that. As an interim CEO, she's reporting to the president and the leadership team. And, look, Kevin Sears, I got to give the guy credit too. I mean, he jumped into a massive fire pit.
And he's been on the road advocating for that organization since he became the president.
Yeah, and you got to give the guy credit. I mean, even he came to HousingWire, it wasn't even planned. He was there. He jumped on stage. He is trying so hard to right the ship. And you saw the the New York Times article that came out yesterday, and I think I think that stuff is good, but I also think the membership needs to put in perspective. All of that stuff that was posted was from a while ago. That was a while ago. And so, do I think NAR needs to clear the air on some of that? Sure. But also Bob Goldberg's been gone for a while now. And so a lot of these things are being addressed. I think transparency is good. At the same time, that organization is changing, and it's changing very quickly. And they're trying to do it. And you know me, I've been critical of NAR in a lot of ways. They're trying to do it under a microscope of the Department of Justice and multiple lawsuits. And so that's hard to be able to be fully outward with everything when you've got all these lawyers just tackling on top of you. So I think they're in a tough spot. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that New York Times article, like you said, transparency is great. I'm all for journalism, but it was somewhat backwards looking.
Yeah, it was. Everyone's getting up in arms about it. And I'm like, okay, well, that was a while ago. It's kind of I think people that are in the know kind of knew, not to the degree of what it was. I mean, obviously NAR made some bad choices, like paying for golf memberships, probably not a good idea. But you and I both know this. Volunteer work is tough work. I mean, I'll give you an example. One of my friends is the president of an association. Her term just went out, and I asked her, because we looked at the articles, how many days did you spend on the road? And her comment was 180. And I was like, how much time away from your business was that? She's like, it was a lot. How much money did you lose by not working in your business? She's like, A lot. Do you get a salary? No, I do not. Do you have a stipend? A tiny stipend to help offset crap of me just being gone all the time. And then I was like, do you have an unlimited budget for dinners? She's like, well, no, like we have within certain constraints. But her comment, which I think is very relevant, we're trying to find volunteers to help. And so we kind of have to treat them nicely to dinners and stuff so that they feel appreciated for their work. And I'm like, no shit. Like, yeah. So this, I think I kind of felt like that was a hit piece a little bit, if I'm being honest. There's certainly some stuff in there, but it was like backwards looking and also without context. Executive compensation is different. Volunteer work from all these members, they deserve to have a nice damn dinner. So, because I don't see everybody else volunteering their time, right? So I don't know. I'm mixed on it.
Agreed. NAR is also starting to have some lawsuits percolate again.
Three-way.
And yeah, one of the themes is these three-way membership agreements, which, I'll editorialize for a second. I'm not sure why agents should have to sign up for three different organizations if they're not getting value from all three. So I would love to get your perspective on these lawsuits and these three-way agreements.
So I'll come at this from two angles. One is I have a pretty deep understanding of what NAR's advocacy team does because I'm pretty close with Shannon and the team over there. I think our industry, I'm going to piss off a bunch of people here, but is incredibly naive into what the advocacy work that goes on between local, state, and national associations. Now, in fairness, they need to do a better job of continuing to spread the message on what they do, but the average realtor needs to pick their head up and start asking questions themselves. That's called being an adult and having responsibility into the fees that you pay. If you don't know what your fees are going to, then just go research it. Stop being an idiot and drawing conclusions. So that $56 that gets paid to NAR allows us as an industry to squash bills that would absolutely destroy residential real estate in the United States. And I'll give you some basic examples. NAR is constantly fighting for flood insurance. What are you going to do if you can't get flood insurance? What are you going to do if you can't get fire insurance? I'll give you another one. Your 1099 status that 1.5 million people love to have every day, that is on the chopping block by every administration, Republican and Democrat, every single year. And NAR is there in DC fighting to make sure that doesn't get cut. Because I want to be very clear with my statement for those of you that are realtors listening. If that 1099 status goes away, 60% of you are unemployed the next day. You're all unemployed because there's no scenario where the brokerage could afford to pay you minimum wage and healthcare benefits and if you're not doing enough business. They will fire 60% of the agents right away. So I get irritated by this conversation sometimes because I don't think people are like, screw NAR. Yeah, be emotional. There's some things they're not doing correctly and educate yourself on the things that they are doing correctly because your career is actually dependent upon that organization having the power that they do in DC. 98% of the candidates that they put money behind were elected, Republican and Democrat, to be clear. They are nonpartisan. You can look all this stuff up online. And so if we don't have a voice, then you don't have a voice in the room and politicians will make decisions and sometimes it will not be beneficial for our industry. Now, the other side of that is I'm a free market guy. I feel like there should be choice. But my concern is that without that three-way agreement, everybody acts emotionally and then make decisions that actually hurt themselves in the industry. And then they're going to be like, well, what happened? And I'd be like, you didn't know what you were doing. So that's why you're required to wear a seatbelt is because people make bad choices. And so they de-incentivize you by saying it's required by law because so many people weren't wearing them and then ending up through the windshield. So there's both sides of the argument.
Totally. And I get both sides as well. But sometimes people need the freedom to make bad choices.
I get it. It's all a matter of what you want. Right. And I'm somewhat libertarian in some ways. I'm a free market guy. If you don't want to wear a seatbelt and die, then your choice, go for it. But that's the conversation that we're having right now.
Yep.
So
totally makes sense. So we'll end on clear cooperation because I think you've been, a very staunch advocate for keeping clear cooperation
with a slight modification, but yes.
Yeah, sure. But you've been a staunch defender through op-eds, at live events, on LinkedIn, and there have been a couple characters on the other side of the issue. One of them, Robert Refkin, the CEO of Compass, he's very prominently taken the opposing view. So James, you're a candid guy, you're direct. Why are you right, and why is Robert wrong on clear cooperation?
I'll start with Robert. I have total respect for him as an individual. We just disagree on this particular policy issue. I would just ask that he's just honest with what he's trying to do. And then, like, you can disagree on the merits of profit if that's what you want to disagree on. But this like ruse that it's good for sellers is just nonsense. So there is, and I have, with respect to Robert, far more history in this industry than he ever has. My grandfather owned a real estate company. He was a broker. My grandmother was. Both my parents were. Since 1967, I've been in real estate. I was born in a house when the MLS book still existed. I have historical perspective that he does not, because he's not from the industry. I remember how hard my grandfather and father tried to get both the MLS book in my grandfather's day, and then my father brought on the first MLS system in the area, which was called Boris. It was a DOS-based dial-up system. And the reason for it was because previous to what we have today, all the brokerages had no idea what was for sale. And they would list a property, they would try to sell it to one of their buyers represented by an agent in their firm first. And then if they couldn't, they would start working with everybody else. That's not good for sellers, to be clear. Like, it's proven by every marketplace on the planet. More eyeballs means more offers. That's why eBay exists. So what we're trying to do here, what he's trying to do, is play a game that's just not accurate. Like, he says sellers need choice. I have sold in my company, my people have sold several 100,000 properties in the past 10 years. I don't even know, but it's hundreds of thousands of homes. As the CEO, I get all sorts of complaints. You know which one I've never had, by the way, Diego? I've never had a seller email me and say, I'm really pissed off because my agent put it in the MLS and I had lots of people looking at my home. Not one letter. I can name all the other ones that have happened, but it's never that.
Yeah, so, I mean, the only examples that I can think of, are the 1% of 1% of 1%,
literally,
celebrities and other well-known folks who maybe don't want their property listed, for privacy reasons. But I can't think of anything else, James.
There isn't.
I've been racking my brain.
There isn't. And by the way, most celebrities put their properties online because they want to sell it.
It's fun. It probably will sell for more.
So I just want, my issue is this, just be honest. It's like, okay, you want to have a competitive advantage by having the properties in your company first. You want to be able to dictate where you advertise them. You want to be able to bring in the buyer leads to your organization. You want to be able to recruit agents over because you have inventory that they don't. Just say it. Okay, I respect that. I disagree with the whole premise of your business, but that's fine. There's no scenario where it's actually good for a seller other than you're a Judge or Taylor Swift or whatever. But even Elton John sold his house online. It was available for the world to see. So I just don't buy any of that stuff. If a seller wants it, so I'll end with this. If a seller wants to keep their property off market, I believe the solution I proposed is the right one. I am a free market guy. I do believe a seller should have a choice in how they want to do things. I'm not opposed to that. But to be clear, if you're a member of an MLS, the MLS, you don't, by the way, have to be a member of the MLS. You can choose to be a member of the MLS, okay? If you want to be a member of the MLS, you have to follow the same rules as everybody else. You don't get to pick and choose. And if the rules of the MLS are, you list a home, you're going to put it in the MLS within 24 to 48 hours, so they differ on coming soon and things like that, then you play by the same rules. And so my thing is this. If a seller says, I don't want my property listed on the MLS and I don't want it on Zillow and I don't want it on Realtor and Homes.com, which, by the way, no one's going to say that, but okay. Then there needs to be a form that clearly explains this is what this means. You will not be, and I wanted to say, you will not be on Zillow. You will not be on Homes.com. You will not be on Realtor. There's been countless MLS studies that show you will make anywhere from 5 to 17% less on that property. They understand that. And then the final piece, which is what the Northwest MLS does, by the way, which is where I got this. they're required to have a conversation with an MLS representative to verify that what the seller was told is accurate. So that the agent doesn't just send them the form via DocuSign, the seller signs it not reading what it actually says, and then all of a sudden they're doing this whole thing and this rigmarole. It's have a conversation with the MLS. The MLS says, do you understand what this means? Yes, I do. Then free market guy, go for it. You made a choice. You were educated on it. You weren't manipulated into something else. Then I'm fine with that. I think that's a fair approach to solving this issue. But I think CCP should stay in place because we've created the greatest marketplace in the world, and it works for buyers. It stops fair housing issues, and it works for sellers and gets them the highest price possible. Everybody wins.
James, that's a great place to end.
Thanks for having me, my friend. Appreciate it, as always.